everybody? Richard Dolan here for a courageous conversation.
Well, man, today, you're right. There's no going back.
How do you feel the weight of that desire?
I have been there for a while.
The story's still being written, and you cut the story short.
As they say, I'm playing with house money.
They said, neo-fascist.
You can't imagine, Richard. I've heard everything now.
But I'll tell you what, you ain't never buying your time back. Value your time.
Once you start a courageous conversation, there ain't ever going back to an ordinary one.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. It's Richard Dolan here for a courageous conversation. I'm delighted to have people from all around the world here, listening in, dialing in. We have a legendary conversation today with an incredible human being named David Falk. I know that when we get David going, he's going to say, gosh, I want to go back. He loves that part of the world. We'll hear more from him shortly. But that being said, I want to just welcome each and every one of you here. As you all know, Courageous Conversation started as a stand for people who were dealing with this crisis thing, this COVID thing, this corona thing. And we all thought that by connecting through conversation with people that inspired us would be a real great way to kind of come at the end of the week, raise a glass and toast yourselves to humanity to say, hey, you did it. You made it. You're here. Now, for today, I felt it was really important to maybe dig deep and find on YouTube something that would capture the essence, the magic, the power of who David Falk is. And I mean, I got to tell you something, folks. I got to tell you something. For those who are watching the recording, 650,000 listeners post our live recording. I mean, you got to know something. It's hard to find one thing you want to show people about David Falk. And you want to know why? Because if you remember the movie, The Wizard of Oz, the whole movie was predicated on the fact that you had these characters that were seeking and looking for the thought leadership of the Wizard of Oz. And at the very end, and I know I'm going to ruin it for all of you, is that behind the curtain was this man. And I'm not suggesting that David is small nor short, but there was a man that was pulling the levers and pushing the buttons who indeed was the Wizard of Oz. Now that's who David Falk is. A man who's behind the curtains, pushing the buttons, having pulled the levers in some of sports' most memorable, epic, legendary moments that the history books will always, in fact, repeat, record, and revere. So with that being said, I'm going to go straight into my YouTube here because I want to show you one little introduction, which is so important to me to show you because I think it really sets up the tone for who David is. Take a look. You see that, Noam?
David Falk taught me the evolution of business, how to utilize my likeness, my personality, my basketball talent, and channel that into the business aspect of Michael Jordan as a person.
Everyone who's been represented by David turns out winning. He really takes good care of his people, and we've become great friends. And my life has gotten a lot better as a result of my association with David.
I think the only person I've ever met who's more competitive than David Falk is Michael Jordan. I think what's made him successful is his tenacity. He never stops.
The more I was around him, even though I couldn't get in a word because he talked so damn much, I knew that I liked this guy. I really liked him, and I thought he really worked hard at what he did, and that was very important to me.
If David Falk had been my agent, I'd probably be the happiest man in the world today because he knew how to strike a deal with other owners.
David Falk's reputation, I think his reputation towards the players, from the players was great. The management side, they thought it was cutthroat. He's hard-nosed, hard negotiator. So it was always in the corner for the players.
I would say that the words I would use to characterize my relationship with David while I was commissioner was contentious friends, or we were friendly and contentious at the same time.
You see what I mean? Now let's give him a real warm welcome, our very good friend, the one and the only Mr. David Falk.
Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Boy, I got to tell you, it's really hard to narrow it down because there's so much that can be said about you, who you are, the difference you've made, the difference you continue to make. I mean, I can introduce you as an incredible son to Pearl, an incredible father to a beautiful family, I mean, I can go on to talk about who you are to Rhonda, who you are to players, who you've been to the league, who you are across many sports, the philanthropist you are, the educator you've been, I mean, the mentor, the mentee, but best of all of them, my friend. I mean, gosh, David, it's such an honor to be talking to you today. So first and foremost, how are you?
I'm doing great. You know, obviously we're going to talk about the pandemic a little bit today. And I had a long conversation this afternoon I'd like to share with you and your listeners, saying that, you know, while this is not what I would have wished for, and there are a lot of restrictions in our lifestyles, you know, overall, I think that we're very blessed. We've been tested. I know you're a pioneer in testing of COVID. And, you know, I think that we're blessed for what we have. We could be in a one-bedroom apartment with 4 kids, you know, worrying every day, are they going to be healthy? And so I think a lot of the approach to COVID has got to be psychological as opposed to simply scientific. It's how you look at your situation. And I think most people that I know overall are, you know, are very, very fortunate.
Well, you know, indeed you are, and indeed we are. So let's get started with this conversation. God bless the family. I know that you've been very dedicated and committed to making sure that everyone is safe and sound. And that's just the kind of dad you are. So folks, here's the thing about you. Let me start from the beginning. When I had the chance of meeting you, David, I'm sure that to rewind the history tapes for people that know who I am and know who you are, but want to know how do we come to meet, I have a great story, because it's not every day you get to work with someone like a Juwan Howard, who, for those who don't know, is a 2-time NBA world champion. I mean, one of the longest standing, most legendary players in the world of the NBA. It was actually David Falk who negotiated the very first $100 million contract in the NBA that took effect. And after working with Juwan, when I asked him now what, we both kind of came up with the idea of, hey, why don't we come up with a plan to buy a piece of the Miami Heat, to become equitable stakeholders? And I mean, Magic Johnson just negotiated this incredible deal to be a part owner in the Dodgers. Why don't we do that? He goes, well, before I do anything, you got to talk to David Falk. I said, okay. And David and I spoke every day, where he talked sensible, he talked simple, but every time I called him, he said no to me. And I kept coming back and kept coming back. And it was during that time I really came to learn, realize, and appreciate everything that this man has been for not just Juwan, but for all the players. So David, take us back. What made you want to become an actual agent, a lawyer, a negotiator, the argumenter that I know you've been touted to be? Where did that start for you?
Well, since you have an international audience, my parents are both first-generation Americans. My grandparents emigrated from Poland, all 4 of them. My grandfather on my mother's side was a scholar, and all of his children went to college. My mom went to college at a time when very few women went. She graduated at 19, and she was my life's mentor. She really stressed education. And from an early age, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I never wanted to be a fireman or an Indian chief or an astronaut. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I began to love sports probably about 12 or 13 years old. And I had this sort of romantic notion in high school, like, wouldn't it be cool if you could combine a career in law and a career in sports? Now, that time, the sports agenting industry basically didn't even exist. It really started in the late 60s. A gentleman named Mark McCormick, who was a pioneer, started the business. And my very first day at college at Syracuse University, I met the 2-star basketball players on my dorm floor, became great friends to this day. And I thought, wow, how cool is this when we all become seniors? I'm going to represent these guys. And lo and behold, one of the 2 was the 6th leading scorer in the country, got drafted. And we talked about it. We both knew that I had no clue what to do. So I went off to law school to get some training. And in law school, I started networking, met a lot of different people through friends and family. And because the business was so small, they all said, God, we love your passion, but we're not hiring anyone. And we're certainly not hiring anyone with your academic qualifications. Meet this guy. And so I met all these different people. And finally, I was in law school in Washington, D.C. They said, you should meet this gentleman named Donald Dell, who's the Davis Cup captain. And that's how I got my start, working for Donald for free, because he wouldn't hire me. And I offered to work for free.
So first and foremost, Pearl, your mom, I mean, she was a mentor. She spoke 8 languages. She was an interpreter back in the war days. I mean, knowing who she was definitely sounds like being a mentor was number 1. First and foremost, everyone needs a mentor. Number 2, it sounded like you weren't afraid to start with nothing. So even though you knew nothing, you were willing to actually enter conversations knowing that you didn't know much. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
But willing to work for free to learn the craft. Let's pick up from there. Well, where did that commitment to do that come from?
Honestly, it was a spur of the moment decision. I called Donald for months to try to get an interview. Everyone else was very generous with their time. Didn't take long. I met Larry Fleisch, who founded the NBA Players Union. I met Bob Wolf, who represented Larry Bird, and Doug Flutie. Met a lot of really well-known people. Donald was impossible to get through, and he gave every excuse that an executive gives when they don't want to take a phone call. He's in a meeting, he's at lunch, he's out of town, he's in the bathroom, whatever. And finally one day I had it. I thought this was so rude. And I rarely went to the library in law school. I went to the law library back in the days when there were payphones. This is pre-cell phones. And I bought a bunch of quarters. I called him every 10 minutes. And when he ran out of excuses, he gave me an interview, kept me waiting 3 hours to have the interview. And I was doing it on my lunch break from a job at a law firm. And we got done with the interview. So look, really appreciate your interest, but we're not hiring right now. And I was crushed. And I said, well, I'll work for free. And I guess he thought that was a pretty good offer. He couldn't turn it down. So I worked for free the entire summer at night. I worked during the day for a very large law firm called Sibley and Austin in Washington from 9 to 6. And then I walk across the street and work for Donald from 6:30 to 11. And at the end of the summer, he gave me a part-time job clerking while I was a third-year law student. And they allowed you to work 20 hours a week and be a full-time student. I probably averaged 80 hours a week. I basically didn't go to school. I did what it took to take my exams. And I waited all year long, Richard, all year long to get a job. And finally, a week after graduation, I think my friends from law school would have burned his building down if he didn't hire me because they know how badly I wanted this. He sat me down for lunch at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Now, for me, that's almost dinner. And he said, look, you worked really hard. I'd like to make you an offer and start you out at $13,000 a year, which was less than any secretary in the office was making. I said, Donald, I'm a lawyer. Starting lawyers, even in the government, make 18 to 20. And he said, really? That much? I said, yeah. I said, well, that's great. But at Del Crago, starting associates, the only one started at 13. And I got to tell you, over 17 years, while I had a wonderful experience at ProServe, and it got me on my way in my career, I never made much money, but I had incredible job satisfaction, doing something I loved.
I want to catch it because I want everyone to write this down or make a mental note of this. David, even your wife, Rhonda, noticed in you had ambition. And it's only until you get to know who you are and what you've done and the lengths you went through just to be driven and remain committed to an opportunity. Where did that come from? Because there seems to be a hunger that you had to be somewhere you really want to be, and you wouldn't take no for an answer. And I know that to be true because it's consistent with the reputation you've earned in the league for being the most powerful person in the NBA amongst many leagues, second to the commissioners, because you simply get it done. Where did that come from?
I think mostly it came from my mom. It probably came from my grandfather, who I really didn't know very well. He died when I was 8 years old, but he came to America with nothing. He was paid to be a scholar in Poland. He came, he was Jewish. He didn't believe in working on Saturdays, but he ended up opening up a store that had to be open on Saturdays if he wanted to make money. And I think nothing that his children did was good enough. Not in a bad way, in a loving way, but he had very, very high standards. My mom got the gene. I definitely have the gene, and my older daughter, Dana. I said, I'm sorry, sweetie. Your parents always argue, who's got the good hair, who's got the nice eyes, who's athletic. I'm sorry, you got the gene, and I know that I can be very demanding. It's not something that's intentional, it's genetic. And I think the good part of that is that I'm my own worst critic. I'm grateful for the kind words people say, but if I don't satisfy myself, it really doesn't do very much for me. And so I have very, very high standards for myself. And people who don't know me in the world of sports think that I'm either arrogant or I'm greedy or, whatever. And I said, no, you don't understand. This is just me trying to please my mom. It's just something inside of me. I know that she's going to say, you could have done better. No matter what you do, she was an extremely loving person, but incredibly demanding. And I think that shaped me for the kind of person that I am.
You know, David, I get to say this, and I don't get to say this often to a lot of people because I've come to know who you are. We talk often. We're doing other things together, which in the witness of the hundreds of thousands that will watch this recording, I want you to know I'm grateful. I'm humbled. I'm lit up, scared to death, unhappily so, by the way. But I get your drive because I've always wanted to work with you. But here's, just to get back to the point, it would almost seem like I can see how being the hard negotiator and always wanting to win, it sounds like for everybody, they've got to get grounded with what drives you. You know, who is it you want to make happy? Who is it you want to make proud? So when I look at David Falk, and all of you look at at yourselves, how do you live? How do you lead? And what will you leave? Because the way you've lived and how you've led, David, is equal to what you're leaving. And we'll get to your philanthropy and your trusts and the wonderful work that you're doing in the world of education. But it's consistent. Like who you were in the 80s and who you are right now in 2020 is actually quite a mirror of each other. Wouldn't you agree?
I think I've matured. I think as you get older and your experiences shape you, I would say in a very introspective way, power anybody in a negotiation. I wanted to be like a trial lawyer. I wanted to present my evidence and persuade them that what I was asking for was the correct amount. Having majored in college in economics, I early on, probably in the early 80s, long before people heard the word analytics, I developed my own crude analytics. I developed what I would call leading economic indicators in the business of basketball to try to explain to the owners why I thought my players were worth what they were worth. So as an example, in 1985, I signed on my own my first big player, which was Patrick Ewing. And at the time, the highest rookie ever had made $1.2 million a year. And the highest veteran in the history of the league made $2 million. And we ended up signing Patrick for $3.2 million a year for 10 years, 55%. And people ask, how could that happen? I said, it's very simple. Prior to 1985, the two worst teams in the league would flip a coin to see who could draft the best player. You had a 50-50 chance if you were a bad team of getting a Magic Johnson, a Michael Jordan, and Patrick Ewing. But in 1985, David Stern was concerned that the teams would start losing intentionally to get into the coin flip. So we created a lottery system where the 7 teams back then, now there's 14, that didn't make the playoffs had a blind lottery. And the Knicks won the first lottery. Now, you don't have to do complicated math. If the odds go from 50-50 to having the number 1 pick to 1 in 7, you just made an asset that's very valuable, more scarce, and the value goes up. And so I basically told the Knicks, there are no comps, throw everything else out. There's a very unique situation. It's an aberration, and we need to approach it in an aberrational way. And it took a while, but I was dealing with a very, very smart guy on the Knick level who ended up running baseball advanced media, and he got it. And it took all summer, but so it wasn't a question of being tough or intimidating. It was more like being a good trial lawyer and be able to see the case and present it in a cogent way. And as I got older and developed my own reputation, I think the people I dealt with realized I wasn't trying to intimidate them. I wasn't trying to beat them. The idea that negotiations, I teach negotiations like you teach real estate investment. And I teach my students negotiations is not a zero-sum game. One side doesn't win and one side doesn't lose. Both sides have to win if you want to make a deal that's going to last. And if in an industry like sports, which is very small, you deal with the same people over and over again. If you win too much or you overdo it when you have the edge, one day you're not going to have the edge and they're going to scalp you. As you can tell, not much left here to scalp. So you try to moderate. As you get older, you try to moderate your position. You want to be assertive. And so I believe in any industry that there's a zone of fairness for making a deal. And my job is to be at the top end of the zone, and the owner's job is to be at the bottom end of the zone. And but for an aberrational situation like Patrick, if you get out of the zone, you're going to create problems down the road. And so I came to believe that the most important aspect of what I did was to learn how to make a deal and generate goodwill with the people, because you're going to deal with them again. And you want them to know that you're trying to do a good job for your client. You're trying to be aggressive, but you're trying to be fair.
That brings up another really great point because, understand that you were the pioneer behind creating your leading economic indicators. And today we've got Google and analytics and other types of digital intelligence that's tracking things and whatnot. You really, in fact, you were the first to lead the charge in determining the value of a player against the slot system, right? So if someone got drafted the 5th, it would imply that the person who got drafted 6th would actually make less than the one who got drafted 5th. And so as you were creating your own science, if it were, to significance, that really gave rise to the two things that I've heard from friends of mine, clients of yours in the business, that said, when David sold his service, he sold his competence and track record. Nothing else really mattered. And trust came. How much of that statement would you agree with?
100%. I'll tell you why. In our industry, you're dealing with really young people, 19, 20, 21 years old, that are bright but have no experience in business. And they've been recruited their whole lives because they're very talented to go to the right junior high, the right high school, the right college, and everyone's telling them how great they are. Then you go pro, and the owner's not going to tell you how great you are. He's got 14 other great athletes just like you. And so you have to be straight. And so I used to tell them, I'm not here to massage your ego. I'm here to massage your wallet and get over yourself. You're not the first great player I've had. You're not going to be the last. And so you try to say I try to compare myself, and I don't want to say this in an egotistical way. I told him the following when I met. If I made someone like Juwan, who's a very bright guy, I would ask him the following question. If tomorrow morning you bought a lottery ticket for the Michigan lottery and you found out you won $500 million, who would you want to manage the money? And a lot of us said, well, I have a friend next door, a cousin. I said, no, that's the wrong answer. You want Warren Buffett to manage your money because he's the best investor in the history of the United States. Ann Arbor Gazette. He's not going to read the Ann Arbor Gazette and call up Juwan and say, hey, I heard you just made $500 million. I'd like to make a presentation to manage your money. That's pocket change for Warren Buffett. And so I said, smart players, instead of the agents recruiting the players, if you're really smart, you'd recruit the agent if you felt that there was a Warren Buffett out there. And we had a Warren Buffett track record. Our record, objectively, we outperformed the competition by about 20%. And so when I met Juwan, I never told you this, he literally had the printouts of all the players drafted where he thought he'd get drafted. And he asked, why this guy's contract so much? Why did you get more for this guy? He was really prepared. And that really registered with me. It really made a very strong impression. And so I think at the end of the day, you could be very persuasive and con someone into hiring you. I could have conned my college friends into letting me represent them, but I would have done a disastrous job because I wasn't ready. And so I believe you are selling the track record for the very same way that the player is being drafted by the pros based on his track record in college. That they understand. But when it comes to translating that on the business side, sometimes it gets a little bit lost in translation.
No, absolutely. And that gives rise to just how your journey led you to go out on your own when you launched Fame. Your firm, you were born out of a space. And actually the rumor is, or the talk was, that the movie Jerry Maguire, in some ways, shape and form, emulated a little bit of your own history, where you left a firm. And in that case, he brought only one client with him. But in your case, you brought all the clients. Tell us about that, how you make that leap of faith.
So this will sound really crazy for someone who considers himself an entrepreneur. I never want to go on my own. I was doing my dream job. And in a very short period of time, from 1982 to 1986, in that 4-year period, I signed Michael Jordan, James Worthy, Patrick Ewing, Chris Dolan is the 5th all-time sacker in NFL, James Lofton retires the all-time receiver, John Thompson and Johnny Dawkins the National Player of the Year. If that had been my entire career, I would have been in the Hall of Fame. And so while I got many, many job offers to leave and run teams or be a general manager, I thought to myself, God, you have to be really stupid. You have this group of guys that are really loyal to you, that are at the very top of their profession. How could you leave that? And so as I got these offers, my boss, who became my partner and later became my employee, we flipped roles. He would ask me, are you going to leave? And I said, Donald, I'm never going to leave with 2 caveats. One, if I ever find out that there's anyone in the company other than you making more money than I am, I'm gone. I'm bringing in the most business. And 2, if I ever feel that the only way you will pay me fairly is for me to threaten to quit. I don't want to have that kind of relationship. If you don't realize what my value is, I'm going to go. And one day he failed both tests and I had a non-compete. I couldn't stay in the industry. I was nervous as hell. I just resigned. I just couldn't work another day there. And I ended up buying the business. I did what was then called an LBO, leverage buyout. And I took the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel. So basically negotiated me out of the deal by not doing what he should have done to protect a valuable asset.
So David, again, thank you so much for being here. And by the way, are you open to getting some questions from around the world?
Of course, love to do that.
Fantastic. So we've got some
I
folks.
know they're going to hit the wall. They're not going to want to hear, they're going to want to ask their own questions.
I love it. All right. But let me get to the next point, which is this. What I find fascinating, David, one of the things I learned from Juwan, who looks up to you, who always has said to me, as a world champion, now head coach at the NCAA level there in Michigan. What an incredible legacy story that's becoming right now with Jace over there, but more than another time, because that's a whole story in itself.
Tremendous story.
Immense story. Is that David always assigned a value. And when it came to selling your business, you always assigned it a value. And when you sold your company, it wasn't like the business that you were in, the services business was known to be sold quite often and at a multiple that was understood and calculable. You declared a value and you sold your business for $200 million. Would it be fair to say that you didn't ever have a self-worth issue and declaring that kind of value wasn't difficult, or was it? Tell us about what thinking went behind that.
That's a great question and a great story. So it never occurred to me that you could sell a personal service business. I was only on my own maybe 5 years, and we got a call from American Express. We got a call from one of the Walton-heirs that owns Walmart, that loves sports, and said, we'd like to buy your business. And having worked for a large company, the second largest company in the world for 17 years, ProServe, I was the vice chairman. I sort of loved coming in the morning and seeing my name on the door. Our company was called FAME, was an acronym for Falk Associates Management Enterprise. So I really didn't want to sell. But then we got a really serious offer from a friend of mine named Bob Gutkowski, who had been the president of Madison Square Garden. And we went out and hired Goldman Sachs to be our banker. And Goldman assigned a young guy to be our banker. And he studied all our contracts. He said, the company's worth $75 million. And I said, great, I would never sell a company for $75 million. And my partner asked me, why not? Don't you think that's a lot of money? I said, well, considering that 5 years ago I was making $220,000 a year, it's an ungodly amount of money. But I don't want to work for someone again. I had a sort of an abusive relationship with my partner. I like being on my own and controlling my own destiny. And so I really didn't want to sell it. I was making what I thought was, good money. And so I arbitrarily decided that if I couldn't get $100 million, I wouldn't sell the company. So one day, the chairman of the company that bought us, his name was Bob Sillerman, the company is called SFX. He called me up to New York and said, look, I'm dying to buy your business and we don't seem to be making progress. What do you think the business is worth? What do your people think the business is worth? And I said, well, Goldman tells me the business is worth somewhere between 75 and 80. He said, well, my people are Bear Stearns and they're telling me the business is worth 75. Why can't we make a deal? And I said, because I really don't want to sell it at all. And I just arbitrarily decided that for the aggravation level of working for someone again, I have to get $100 million, I'll just keep it. And if you don't think it's worth 100, you won't offend me in the least, because Goldman doesn't think it's worth 100 either, but I'm not going to sell it. And if you come back to me next summer, sort of like a guy who's single for a long time, the longer you're single, the harder it is to get married. Next year, my number will probably be 200. And so we made a deal in 10 minutes. So, okay, he basically tried to give us 100, but he gave us so much stock that the stock ran through the roof, ended up paying us 200. And literally 2 years into I'll tell you the epilogue to the story is better than the first part. 2 years into the deal, I was in what's called the office of the chairman. So it was the chairman of the company, the president, myself, and one other guy. Sillerman sells his company, which is called SFX, to the largest radio station company in America, Clear Channel, for $4.5 billion. And I go up to New York, we have a board meeting, we approve the merger, and I walk out of the room, I'm 50 years old. made a lot of money. I don't have a job. They've just sold the company out from under me. And I'm trying to figure out what the hell are you going to do now? And I get a call on my cell phone from the chairman of Clear Channel, who's a legend in the broadcast business named Larry Mays. And he goes, Mr. Falk, my name is Larry Mays. I'm the chairman of Clear Channel. I'd be like, I don't know, be like Warren Buffett calling you up saying, hey, my name is Warren Buffett. I'm an investor. Like everyone knows who Warren Buffett is. So Mr. Mays, I'm very familiar with who you are. Like, what can I do for you? He said, well, I don't know if you've heard, but I've just bought your company, SFX, and I want to know, are you going to stay? And I said, gosh, I just learned about this 5 minutes ago and my head is spinning. I'm trying to digest what this means for me. I'll let you know in about 6 months. And he goes, no, David, you don't understand. I didn't want to buy the business, but your chairman, Bob Silverman, literally hypnotized my two sons into buying this business. I think it's a complete boondoggle, but I'm going to stand by my sons. And the only thing that interests me in the entire company you have, I'm a big sports fan. I'm familiar with your career. If you don't stay, I'm not going to buy the business. I said, Mr. Mays, with all due respect, I'm not a megalomaniac. Sports is 8% of SFX. It'd be less than 1% of Clear Channel. It can't possibly matter to you whether I stay or not. He said, no, it's just, I'm telling you, it's a deal breaker for me. And so it's okay. Talk about pressure. You stay here holding up a $4.5 billion merger, and so I said, if it's that important, I'm flattered. I'll give it a year. And at the end of the year, I left. I just couldn't stand. So what happened was our business, when we sold it, we were like Neiman Marcus. We were Ferrari. We were small with very, very high-end clients. We weren't looking for volume. We weren't trying to be Walmart. We were trying to be Neiman. Larry's son comes in to see me right after he buys the business, and he says to me, David, we're one of the top New York Stock Exchange companies in America. We're going to call on your division to produce 15% year-over-year growth. I said, look, with all due respect, you must not know anything about sports. That's impossible. I can't do that. And he said, why not? I said, because the collective bargaining in basketball only allows the player salaries to go up by 10.5%. So there's no way I can give you that kind of growth. And he said, look, I thought you were a smart guy. That's very simple. Just sign more clients. And I said, look, you don't understand. I'm not Walmart. We're Neiman Marcus. We've got to where we are by being very selective and having guys like Michael know he's not one of 900 clients. He's one of a few. And our philosophies just didn't jive. And so I wasn't angry, but it just didn't work. And it didn't allow me to be who I feel I am. I think I'm creative. I think I'm an entrepreneur. And I don't want to be stuck in a very tight wall where I can't do what made the business worth buying in the first place. They try to take that away. And so I resigned.
But let's get in there, because let's open this up. I mean, a lot of people here are associated with big brands. There's people that are associated with, the 10X brand or a Grant Cardone brand or other kinds of brands, and even their businesses and jobs. How big of a deal do you find it was for you when you sold your company to be associated with super brands like Patrick Ewing, like Michael Jordan, like those that you've cited already? How big of a deal was it? Was it everything for you?
Well, I think I think it put me in a position to sell the company. We were the best known, most successful agency in basketball ever. Maybe in sports, but certainly in basketball. I mean, to put it in perspective, and I say it's not to sound braggadocious, but I had 24 employees and 40 clients, and we sold the business for $200 million. I bought my biggest competitor, who was a very good friend, who had 240 clients, 6 times more than I did, and I paid $30 million for it because he didn't have the EBITDA, And so we ran the business very well. We didn't cut the fees for the players. We didn't cut corners. We ran it like a business. And so I think that the prestige of the superstars we represented put us on the map, but we managed the business very well, which gave us the numbers that appeal to the Goldman Sachses and the Bear Stearns.
And speaking of numbers, for those who are tuning in, David Falk is someone that, you've got to understand, he's not just an agent. He was the one that rewrote, this is a true tale. He rewrote the NBA contract in such a way that it actually turned out to become the collective bargaining agreement that's actually been in service for now 25 years later. I mean, David, at the end of the day, there's so many really cool little things about you and your stats that if there was a scoreboard, it would say, that's David Falk, that's David Falk, that's David Falk. Tell me today, given the kind of business you're at 70 years of age and what you're up to, what kind of work do you do now with the brands, with the players that you once represented today? What's life look like for David Falk and the celebrities you managed?
Well, in 1986, the union passed a rule that prohibited agents from representing both players and coaches, or players and owners. And so as a lot of my clients retired and got into coaching, Juwan, Tommy Amaker, Johnny Dawkins, Patrick Ewing, John Paxson, Danny, if I can name tons of them, I wasn't able to represent them anymore legally. Now, a lot of the agents cheat on the rule, but I don't. And so I had to hire another agent for them, which is like putting your child up for adoption almost. It was very hard for me. And so I maintain very strong social relations with these guys. I can't represent Michael Jordan anymore because he owns a team. We're great friends. If he needs advice from me, he'll call and ask. I don't volunteer my advice. I don't tell him how I think he could run the team better. He's 57 years old. He's a very bright man. What he said on that tape, I want to say to you, people always want to know, what do you want to be known for? And I think most people who don't know me would say, you'd want to be known as someone who changed the salary structure in the NBA, invented Air Jordan, whatever, sold your business, made a lot of money. No, what Michael said is the highest compliment to me, that I taught him the business, because as the son of a teacher, I regard myself as a teacher. And I think that while one of my job responsibilities was to negotiate the player's contract, my principal job was to teach a young Juwan Howard at 20 years old the business of sports, so that when he finished playing, he could be a productive member of society. He didn't have to be a coach. He could be a general manager. He could be a salesman. He could be a business executive. And many of my clients made me very proud by what they've done after they hung up their sneakers.
Well, and I hope you get this, David. I mean, this conversation's been about you and not Michael, not Jumpman, not anyone else, because with all due respect to them, I mean, you're the legend I'm talking about. It's your tutelage, it's your mentorship, it's your thought leadership that a lot of people are here watching, listening, and learning from. So I just want to make sure you get that.
I like to tell people I'm a legend in my own mind. I'm not an egotistical person, and I'm extremely grateful for the brands that enabled me to sell my company. Also gave me my own reputation. That the chance to work for Michael Jordan and Patrick, their entire careers. In the business I'm in, there's no greater. If I was in the music business, I would have wanted to represent Beyonce or Frank Sinatra. In sports, if you're in basketball, having a chance to represent John Thompson, Coach K. I have 11 clients in the Hall of Fame. When I was very young, they made me. They made me who I am. And I felt a challenge to reciprocate the trust they put in me and show them that I was as good at what I did as they were at what they did. And that was a constant challenge to me, all the things that I did to sort of stretch the envelope in the NBA weren't out of ego, wasn't out of greed. It was out of a knowledge that that's what they're hiring you for. That I want to come back to something you said earlier. So when I was very young, there was a system in sports called slotting. So as you said, if you're a player and you're Juwan Howard and you drafted number 5, you would expect to make a little less money than the guy at number 4 and a little more money than the guy at number 6. And after a couple of years in the business, it occurred to me, wow, if all I'm doing is getting the average of what 2 other people that my client didn't hire did, what the hell do they need me for? They could do it by themselves. They just take the 2 deals, go to the owner and say, I want the average. So I wanted to figure out for myself what I thought the value of my client was to the team that picked them based on the unique circumstances. So, and maybe one of the most I mentioned Patrick was the first ever winner of the lottery. 3 years before Patrick, we represented James Worthy, who was Michael's teammate at North Carolina. He's the only player in the history of the NBA to be drafted #1 by the team that had just won the championship, the Lakers. Never happened before. It's never happened since. Now, if you tell me that he is the same value to the Lakers as a guy going #1 to a team that won 20 games, I'd say you don't understand economics. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the Lakers, and that changes James Worthy's value. And I think to be successful in any business, you have to be able to differentiate your client from the quote, the comps, or they don't need you.
And just a slipstream so I can get to some questions before we wrap up, because I can't believe how fast time's flying, and I promise you I'd get you out to the golf course.
No, I'm good. No, I'm good. I have you for as much time as you can handle.
Oh, you're a good man. I love you to death. But is know your clients. Do the research, right? Do the math, figure it out, lean in, roll your sleeves up, sharpen your pencil, pull out a calculator, and really understand your client. Know the market, know what you're doing, know what value you're adding, and stand for them. Because one of the things I'm picking up from David is that the way in which his clients trust him is because they know he values them. And it's evidenced and demonstrated by how he stands for them. And that's the history book says, speaks for itself. Wouldn't you agree, David?
Yes, but I also think you have to be confident, because these players, these clients are stars in their own right, and they're going to test you. And I would say the unfortunate part of our business today is most of the agents are being managed by their clients instead of managing the players. And so, like you mentioned, Alonzo, I negotiated the first ever $100 million contract in professional sports for Zoe. And then I told him to turn it down. Now, Alonzo was a foster child growing up. His parents were drug addicts. And he said, David, are you on drugs? You want me to turn down $100 million? I'm making $4 million. And I said, Zoe, in my opinion, the market's going to change in the next year. And you're going to make way more money if you just wait 1 year. And he said, I can't. I said, well, I'm going to resign. I'm not going to put my name on you doing this deal. It's going to cost me $4 million in fees. And that's how strongly I feel about it. So he finally agreed. And he went from having a 13-year deal for $113 million to a 7-year deal for $105. So he would have played for free for 6 years. Now, you have to be very confident yourself to stand up to these guys who don't want to do what you tell them to do. And they don't know enough, really. It's not because they're not intelligent. They're not experienced enough in business to make these decisions. So in certain ways, in a very bizarre circumstance, you're both the agent and the client at the same time. You're the agent and the principal, because the principal you're working for doesn't know enough to really make a good decision. And you have to really push them. I had a client tell me last year, you're a bully. I said, I'm not a bully, I'm passionate. When I know you're making them, this guy wanted to take a deal for 4 years for $40 million. And I told him, you can't play on that deal because I'm going to break your leg. A year later, he signed a 4-year deal for $86 million. Now, I said, you calling me a bully, would you want to be passive, or it'll cost you $46 million? And so I think that's your job. And it's not always fun. It's not the glamour you read in the front page. A lot of times, and some of the people you are arguing with are very, very smart people. John Thompson, who other my mother's, my hero in life, he wanted Patrick to leave school as a junior. I wanted him to stay as a senior. It's a role reversal. Usually the agents are pulling the kids out of school early. And we got into an intense argument. And he's cursing me out like a truck driver. And it's very unnerving. John's 6'10", he's a very bright guy. And finally, at the height of the argument, he says to me, David, you're telling me to keep him in school because you think that's what I wanted to do, but I don't. I want him to leave. It's way too much responsibility on me. What if he gets hurt? What if he doesn't have a good year and he loses a lot of money? And I said, John, it will never happen. A franchise center, it's like beachfront property. The value will never go down. And he went at me for like an hour. And at the end of the hour, I was so frustrated. I finally said, John, do whatever the hell you want, but I'm going to tell you three things. One, the value will never go down for franchise center. Two, Patrick is not going to get amnesia, forget how to play at 21. And three, you could buy disability insurance to cover the contract. So if I step 10 feet away, I'll show you a plaque. A year later, the end of Patrick Sr. gets drafted by the Knicks. He gets the highest deal in the history of basketball. And the player the year before who went number one got $7 million for 5 years. Patrick's signing bonus was $5 million. So we signed the contract on September 20th, 1985. And literally signs the contract, and the Knicks come out and give him a check for $5 million. I had never seen a check for $5 million. And so Patrick grabs the check. I said, give me that damn check. And I turn it over. I write for deposit only. He signs it. I take the train back to DC from New York. It's 3 hours. I go straight to a photo engraver. I had 3 bronze copies of the checks made and put on a walnut plaque. I kept one. I gave one to Pat. And I sent one to Big John. And I said, John, I told you so. Love and kisses, David. He put the plaque up, but not the note. And now, if you think that it was fun to get cursed out by John Thompson for an hour, it was unnerving. But I knew at age 33 that if I didn't stand up to him and tell him what I really believed was the right decision, he would never respect me.
Yeah.
And that's like a trial by fire you have to go through with almost every major client at some time. Went through with Juwan when the team was unfair to him. This is because I got to tell the story to your listeners. So Juwan Howard was the 5th pick in the draft in 1994. Very well-known player. And his deal, we had represented the player on the same team the year before, went number 6. He went number 5. Should have taken 10 minutes to make the deal. We offered the team a 4-year deal for $24,150,000. Had it been slotted, that would have been within 99.9% of what the slot was. They offered him a 3-year deal for $3 million. And we had World War III, lasted all summer. And at the end of the deal, we signed to an 11-year deal for $42 million with the right to get out of the deal after 2 years. He became an all-star in year 2. We got out of the deal, and he became, now, in between the time that we had World War I and World War II, I called him into my office. I was so angry at the owner in Washington for not taking a vanilla deal and having this unnecessary war. I said to Juwan, I'm going to tell you something. My wife taught me a valuable lesson. I've been married for 46 years. Ron used to say to me when I get frustrated, don't get mad, just get even. And I said to him, I'm going to make you the first $100 million guy in sports to let Abe Pola know you should not treat a person of your character with such disrespect publicly. And Juwan started laughing. He said to me, David, I love your passion, but you must be on crack. There's no one in the world that will ever pay me $100 million.
True words.
He said that. And sure enough, 2 years later, signed the deal for 105. And I was proud of him for believing in me, for staying with me. I didn't want to have to be at a war with Abe Pola. I didn't ask for the war. I didn't declare the war, but I'm not going to back down because he's being short-sighted and unreasonable. And so I think it's not so much your ego, it's your confidence. It's being a true believer. And I think in any business, you got people all over the world in their own business. You're in real estate. If you believe in the value of a piece of land or a building or a transaction, and someone is at a completely different place, you shouldn't make a deal with them. If it's not something you really believe in and you're not starving, I'm a very principled person and I'm a concept person. And if the concept doesn't make, the money comes from the concept. If you have a concept that makes sense, I think that the value of what you're talking about flows from it.
100%. Speaking of good people, and we both get it because you all sell services and products. I mean, at the end of the day, what David sings, you got to be a stand. And speaking of being a stand for people, let's go to Noam, all the way in Israel, Tel Aviv. Good evening to you, my friend. You're live here with David Falk. Say hello and ask your question, brother.
Shalom.
Hey, good night. Good night, David. Shalom. First of all, I want to thank you on behalf of all the participants, I'm sure I'm speaking of all of them, for your time and knowledge, for being here with us.
My pleasure. Richard's a good friend, and I'd be happy to do anything he asks me to do, within reason.
I want to ask you something. You're talking about negotiation all through the call. How do you know that you got to the final offer and have to close the deal and stop negotiating?
It's a great question. And being Jewish and having been to Israel twice, Israelis are famous for being very aggressive negotiators. So when I was very young, maybe the first 10 years of my career, I thought that when you finish the negotiating process, one side wins and one side loses. And I finally learned, it took me 10 years to learn, that sometimes if you win too much in the short term, you're losing in the long term. So the same year Patrick came out, I had a client named Xavier McDaniel, who was the first player in college history to lead the United States in both scoring and rebounding in the same year. And we went into Seattle to do his deal. And I wanted to get him $800,000 a year, which was way more than the player of the year before him at number 4. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And in one exchange of offers, this was literally, Richard, this was the Wizard of Oz. So I'm dealing with the lawyer for the owner and the general manager of the team, who was a very good friend of mine named Lenny Wilkins, who was a great player, a great coach, and a general manager. Very, very good person. But they were feeding the numbers to some guy in the back room who was analyzing the numbers and coming up with suggestions. And in one exchange, he made a mistake. The guy in the back room, the Wizard of Oz, made a mistake. And the offer he made had some deferred money in it, had a cash value lower than the previous offer. So we're trying to compromise to get closer. And I never get mad when I negotiate, ever. I pride myself on controlling my demeanor. And I said to the lawyer, who's a friend from DC, I said, look, I'm done. If you guys want to go backwards, we're going to end the meeting. I'm going to fly back to DC, and you could call me in January and sign the guide. He said, like, what are you talking about? When they realized they'd made a mistake, at that point, we could have gotten whatever we wanted. We could have gotten 800. But Lenny Wilkins, who was the general manager, was also the coach. So my client's going to have to work for this guy for the next 4 years. And so we stopped at $762,500. We left a small amount on the table as a gesture of respect to Lenny. And I told my client, it's the best $37,000 you're ever going to invest, because you've got to live with this man and work with him for the next 4 years. There's no magical guidelines of when to stop. It's a smart people, it's a judgment call. And I think you have to stop before you're going to embarrass somebody, you're going to cost them their job. But I think you also have to educate the person you're dealing with of what you think the market is, and why you think the market is that. And I think oftentimes in negotiations, people substitute their ego, pure raw ego, for economics, and they're just trying to win. So this morning, I advised a client of mine who's now in management. Okay, so I can't negotiate his deal, but I'm coaching him behind the scenes. And he said, David, you're right, but the owner wants to win. And I said, you tell that owner that you're accepting his numbers. If I would negotiate this deal, I'd ask for twice as much. He's already won. Now, does he want to rub your nose in it and drag you through the ground? Does he want to negotiate you out of the deal that he thinks he has? Just tell him, stop, enough. Stop grinding me on the side issues. You've won the most. And I think that takes intelligence, maturity, self-discipline. You have to really take your ego out of the game, because it's not a contest, it's a process. Negotiation is a process, and the guy you negotiate with has to come away with enough things that justify the deal. If you strip them of everything, I think you fail.
100%. 100%. David, thank you so much. Noam, thanks for the question all the way in Israel. Shalom, my friend, to you and Ohad and the team out there. Hey, listen, I've got Vincent here from Edmonton, Alberta. He's coming in to say hello. You've got David Falk live, my friend. Go ahead.
Thank you, Richie. It's an honor, Mr. Falk. You're a legend, and it's a complete honor to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I'm a big Neil Young fan, so I've never been out to Alberta, but I'd like to get there.
Oh, it's beautiful out here. Awesome. Quick question. Actually, my cousin's sister, who's on the call as well, she asked me this yesterday, and it made me think, how do you deal with the fear of leaving for the unknown? Now, you talked about you're in a big organization and you had to go on your own. How do you deal with that fear?
It wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. Actually, for the first and only time in my life, I actually had a panic attack on the way to meeting my boss for one of our negotiating sessions to buy the business. But I think it's a matter of principle. You know, like I don't want to be, it's like I was in an abusive relationship. It wasn't so much about the money. It was just the way we dealt with each other wasn't appropriate. And I didn't want to threaten him. I had all the leverage, but he wasn't smart enough to understand it. And as I said, I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't live with myself anymore. I got to the point where I try to rationalize it. Hey, I can handle it because I've got Michael and Patrick and all these guys. And one day I woke up, I just couldn't rationalize it anymore. I was scared to death because I had a covenant not to compete. I couldn't call up my clients beforehand and say, hey, I want you to know I'm going on my own. Will you stay with me? I could have gotten sued for that. And so I didn't talk to any of them. And I expected that there would be a certain number and that would say, hey, thanks a million. Not comfortable going with you. You're on your own. You're not big enough. You don't have enough resources. I expected to have, a certain loss. And I wasn't happy about that, but it's just something, it's like getting divorced. You reach a point and you pass the point of no return. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't have a crystal ball, but you just can't live the way you're living, and you have to make a decision. And that's what I did. And I was very lucky because the clients, like when I told them, like no one thought it was a big deal. I called them up and said, hey, I just want you to know I've left ProServe, I've got on my own. And they said, like, big deal. Are you going to retire? So no. And so every single one stayed, which was very gratifying to me personally. I think I put in the work and developed the relationships. Richard and I have become really good friends because we're both inherently relationship nuts. Like I value relationships because no matter how smart you are in any business, I don't care if it's science, real estate, sports, manufacturing, when you're trying to make a deal with someone, you're going to come to a point where you're like close, but you're not there. And neither side feels they should budge. And at that point, what gets you over the top is goodwill. It's feeling that you could work with the person, you could trust the person. You're not exactly like leaving. You're not 100% comfortable, but you have a good enough feel with the person that you could make a compromise. If you don't have that feeling of goodwill, you're never going to get there.
And you know what? Just to add something there, and thanks so much for that question, Vincent, all the way in from Edmonton. David, it's funny, as I'll get to C-Rock here, Mike Sirocco, is David, I noticed that in relationship management, like for example, that thing we're working on, I'm making sure it happens because of my love for you.
And I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah. So like my parents are on standby. I mean, but my point is that when you really truly love your clients, when you love your customers, when you love who you represent, or you love what you stand for, you'll make the impossible happen because you just got to see it through. And David, you're a real champion for that. Here's the last question coming because I want to wind this down. I've promised everybody that we keep it within the hour, but I know we run long. But C-Rock, I know you're mobile. Come on live. You're here with David Falk, legendary agent of all great things. Go ahead, buddy.
What's up, Mr. Falk? Mike C-Rock. Nice to meet you.
I love the look. Man. You look like you're doing a commercial.
Thank you. I followed you and Tiger at a Pro-Am a couple years ago at
Tiger's Tournament
for 18 holes. You have a nice.
How bad I played.
You were a little frustrated on a couple holes, but that's all right. Hey, so you seem to have a little stubbornness in you, like myself, which can be an asset as well as a liability. Can you maybe share with us when your stubbornness got the best of you? A story maybe that where you kind of regret it, maybe?
Absolutely. I'll tell you a great story. So in 1984, I represented my first quarterback in the NFL, Boomer Esiason, who's now a broadcaster who's my younger daughter's godfather, super guy. And his roommate, Frank Reich, picked us in 1986. Frank Reich holds the record for the best comeback in the history of college football and pro football. Came back from 4 touchdowns to win the game. So he got drafted by Buffalo in the 3rd round. And the general manager of Buffalo came to see me, came to my office, which is a mark of respect. And I want to get Frank 3 years for a total of $1 million. His opening offer was $900,000. So right away, I knew we were going to make a deal. And his name was Bill Polian. He was a very, very well-respected executive. You know Bill? Well-respected executive in the NFL. And we talked back and forth, and I took him to lunch. We got up to $950 for 3 years, and he wouldn't go any further. So I didn't agree to the deal because I was really stubborn and hell-bent for leather to get $1 million. So over the next 7 weeks, he would call me and try to bridge the last $17,000 a year, which is peanuts. And being egotistical, immature, stubborn, headstrong, whatever adjective you want to use. So one day, Bill called me. And in football, those of you around the world, American football, before they draft the players, they spend hundreds of hours watching film of him in college. And if you're a quarterback, they break down how fast you go back in the pocket and the angle of your arm. So Polian calls me one day. Now he's really frustrated. He knows he's made a fair offer, and he thinks I'm being a complete butthead, which I was. And he said, David, can I ask you a question? How much film, how many hours of film have you watched of your client, Frank Reich? Now, the minute he asked that question, I know he was trying to explain to me that he has a much better sense of how good Franks can be in the pros than I do, and that I'm being ridiculous not to accept his offer. Now, at the time, Buffalo had the #1 pick in the draft because they had the worst record in the league. They were 2-14, and their starting quarterback, the year before Frank was drafted, had never been drafted. He was a free agent from, of all schools, Yale University, which is not known for sports. So Bill says, how many hours of film do you watch? I said, none. Why do you ask? And he said, look, we've watched hundreds of hours of your client. We know if he takes a 5-step drop in the pocket, it's going to take him 2.1 seconds. If he takes a 3-step drop, he basically told me he knows, how he blows his nose. They knew everything about the guy. So I said, Bill, that's really interesting. Like, what do you use all that film for? Like, what's the purpose of watching all that film? I said, well, David, come on. Purpose is to extrapolate how Frank's going to go from college into the pros. I said, really? Is it really that scientific that you can watch all this film and make a very objective determination of how good the guy's going to be in the pros? And he said, of course, Dave. We spend millions of dollars on watching these. And I really had him going on the film thing. He was like a reformed smoker. At the height of his passion of telling me, how valuable film is, I said, Bill, can I ask you just one question? And he said, sure. I said, if the shit is that scientific, how come that 30 teams passed over your starting quarterback in the draft for 17 rounds last year? He hung up the phone. He gave me the money. But in the 7 weeks it took me to get my client an extra $17,000, he had to pay me 4%. So I got him an extra, whatever it was, $50,000 for 3 years. I charged him 4% of that, 10 grand, so he made 40. After taxes, he probably made about 20. And for 20 grand, in the 7 weeks that my guy wasn't in training camp, he lost any chance of competing for the starting job, and he became a career backup. And so I look back, I learned a lot from that. I learned, number one, when a guy like Polian is really trying to be fair, and he gives you a very credible opening offer, he comes right to the doorstep. That 50 grand is what I said to Noam. I should have said, Bill, thanks a million for coming. You got a deal, and go home. But I was 34 years old. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't mature enough. I had to learn to take my ego out of the equation, and I screwed up.
Hey, listen, David, speaking of screwing up, I mean, we have spent a lot of time together, and there's a number of people here saying, gosh, wish David can talk more about branding and business and negotiation. And I know that your legacy is all about teaching and paying it forward. Can we do this again some other time?
Absolutely.
That would
First
be
of all,
fun.
I've had a lot of fun. Great questions. I like C-Rock. I love the look, buddy. I could brand you tomorrow.
Oh boy, we got ourselves a proposal in the making here, Rock. I got to say a couple things real quick before I let everyone go. You know, it's very rare that someone can get mentored, and it's even rare when they can actually be the mentee. But I've got to say that in my 40s, I've never come to love, appreciate, and respect someone quite like you. I'm honored to be in your company. I'm honored that you've been able to grace us with your attendance. And I know that Pearl would be proud to know that you really embody her lesson, which was to never, ever settle for second best, and to always shoot for the stars. And by gosh, you've worked with all of them. So you'd make her proud. You truly are a champion for her legacy, and you've brightened everyone's day knowing that you embody her spirit, both her intellectual capital and her love for all things David. So thank you for that.
Well, let me respond if I may. So this is not to you, this is to your audience. When I teach negotiation with my partner, Danielle Cantor, who's been with me for 20 years, who's the valedictorian of a class at Wharton B School, #1 business school in America. One of the things that she emphasizes the most before you say the first word of negotiation is preparation. And I've got to give you kudos for your preparation on me, not Michael Jordan, not Juwan Howard, but the personal stuff, because I am a product of my family. I think my mom shaped me, mentored me. I'm very proud to be her son. What I've done in education is to honor my mom as a teacher. I've endowed a college in my name in Syracuse. I've endowed a law school in my name here in Washington. And instead of battling, the deforestation of the rainforest in the Amazon or sickle cell anemia, I've put my resources in education as a way of honoring my mom. So I give you great credit for all the research you've done, the behind the scenes research to understand me for who I am, not for what the bio says.
100%. Well, that's what love does. We lean in, we listen. And for all the years I've known you, I've always been listening, sir. So it's been a real profound pleasure. And on behalf of everyone worldwide, I want to thank you on their behalves, because every corner of the earth has been here. And for the hundreds of thousands that will listen in, David, we are grateful. And we definitely will see you again real soon.
I look forward to it, my friend. Thanks for having me on your show.
Stay safe, brother. Good to see you. And for everybody, be well, be safe, but more importantly, be successful.